The Me Too movement is making waves in unexpected places. It might even swamp the Nobel Prize for Literature. Accusations of sexual harassment combined with separate financial scandals are causing Swedish Academy members to step aside. There might not be enough judges left to come up with a winner. There's talk of eliminating the Literature Prize this year for the first time since World War II. But there is a reason to celebrate in the literary world. A beloved author is coming out with a new book almost a century after she wrote it. Zora Neale Hurston was not well known when she died in 1960. Then her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, was discovered, popularized, and became one of the most admired works of fiction of the 20th century. Earlier, she wrote a book called Barocon, but it was never published because she refused to change the way she wrote it in dialect. It tells the story of Cujo Lewis. At the time, in 1931, he was believed to be the last living person captured in Africa and brought to America on a slave ship. Now his story will be told in the way the author wanted. The book will be published next Tuesday. And here's a paradox for you. If you're feeling lonely, you got plenty of company. The health insurer Cigna reports there's an epidemic of loneliness in the United States. In a survey of more than 20,000 Americans, nearly half, 46%, say they sometimes or always feel alone. 27%, 1 in 4, say other people rarely or never understand them. Young people seem to be in the most pain. More than 2/3 of 18 to 22-year-olds, Generation Z, say they're shy and feel like the people around them are not really with them. Older adults score better on the loneliness scale, but the overall picture is not only sad, it's also a public health issue. Loneliness can lead to sleep disorders, stress, and even weaken your immune system. Paul Hokemeyer is a family and addiction specialist, and he's a therapist. Thank you for coming in to discuss this issue. Why are so many people feeling so lonely, Paul?
Well, because of technology. So we are living in a world where we're all hyper-connected, but we're not hyper-connected to ourselves. We're hyper-connected to our smartphones. We're hyper-connected to our computers. We're all walking around with headphones in our ears, and we see other people. We see the world around us, but we're totally involved with ourselves. It's like we have blinders on, and those blinders are technology.
So, but what's the difference between being alone and lonely?
Well, being lonely is a feeling. So being lonely means that I feel sad, I feel disconnected. Being alone is kind of a state of being. So I can be alone and I can be happy, I can be serene, I can be contented. Loneliness implies a sense of
suffering.
Suffering. There's a suffering to it, right? And one can be enriched and be alone. In fact, most artists, most creative people find their inspiration and are able to create when they are alone and not distracted.
So what is the opposite of loneliness from a clinical definition? What do you feel that makes you not feel lonely, that you need people around you? Because you can feel lonely in a crowd, I know that.
Right.
But what is it literally that makes you not lonely?
Connection. So connecting with other human beings. So when we're connected face to face, sitting in front of one another, our brains are reading each other, and they're also secreting an enormous amount of delicious hormones.
Delicious hormones.
Delicious hormones. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and those fill us with a sense of well-being. And those are produced, they're called endogenous opioids, meaning that they're produced internally, and they give us the similar feeling that we would get from exogenous opioids, which are, basic opioids. So we need to connect with one another and enable our bodies to produce these wonderful, delicious hormones that make us feel terrific.
So I mean, you can actually get high off of friendship.
You can definitely get high off of friendship.
So why Generation Z? I mean, these younger folks who are feeling the sense of loneliness. Yeah, there's so much in modern culture, ride sharing, house sharing, there's so much cooperative everything. How is it in the midst of all that cooperation, there's an epidemic of loneliness?
Because they're inundated with information, and the information that they consume is a veneer. It doesn't have the depth, it doesn't have the richness, it doesn't have the quality of other relationships that require time and trust to develop. So you jump in a ride share and you're with a person for 5 minutes, and chances are you have your headphones in, they have their headphones in. And so you recognize that you're connected physically, but yet you don't get that connection that enables your brain to release these hormones. It just never happens.
How do you prevent yourself from getting to a point where suddenly you recognize that you're lonely? What are some of these coping mechanisms that seemed not to be as present today as they might have been decades ago?
Pay attention to your body. Our bodies are extraordinary instruments. And so if you're feeling lethargic, if you're feeling pulled down, you're going to have to force yourself to push against that, because the nature of loneliness, the nature of depression, tells us that I don't want to do anything about it. I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to turn on my phone. I'm just going to scroll Facebook. I'm just going to have a potato chip. So recognizing that you need to push against that. It's also good to have at least one person who is your soulmate, who is the person who you kind of make a pact with to say, hey, Duarte, when I'm feeling lonely, I'm going to call you on the phone. Right? I know it's like an antiquated concept, right? That I'm going to pick up my phone and call you, and can you call me back so that we can engage in a conversation? Or better yet, if we live in the same building, can you come up to my apartment, or can you meet me down the corner, and we can just kind of sit and have a chat for a minute? So I think part of what we need to do is recognize that technology is great, but there's a flip side to it, and that flip side is that we are living in this malaise, this cultural malaise, and this individual malaise, and that we need to push against that, and that it's very real, and that we're not deficient human beings because we feel sad. Men in particular, think that feeling lonely is a weakness. Right? Because men think, well, I don't need other people. I'm self-sufficient and I'm strong. Men in particular, I think probably if we looked at the data more closely, we would see that men probably suffer from loneliness at a much higher rate than women.
I'm intrigued by what you said, finding a soulmate. We typically take that to mean a romantic partner, a wife, a husband, a boyfriend, girlfriend, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Absolutely not.
So how do you know that you're finding this relationship?
A sense of connection, a sense of ease. Relationships where you are with somebody who's a kindred spirit, a kindred soul. It's like putting on a pair of shoes that fit perfectly. It's like putting on a shirt and you know that's like, this is it just feels good. You don't have to think it through, you don't have to rationalize. You seem to be on the same wavelength. We forget that we're animals. We dress up well and we put on suits and red ties, but we're primates, basically. And so we have this constant ability to send out signals into the world. Is he safe? Is he unsafe? Can I trust this person? Does that person make me feel good? All of these kind of unconscious forces that exist when we're operating interrelationally.
Is there a critical age in development where the mechanics are set to be prone to loneliness or not?
I think loneliness is something that happens to us. It sets in when we come out of the womb.
But what about brain development? Is there a particular time?
There are 3 different times, significant times. So there's 0 to 6, which is important, where the brain is like a sponge. It's hyperactively soaking up everything that's around them. And then another critical period is long. It's between 6 and 22. And during that period, the brain is absorbing and editing, cutting out. So that's why it's important for parents in particular to force their kids to edit out behaviors and consumptions that are going to have a negative impact on their brain development.
And one of those is not combating loneliness. Thank you so much for making this clear, because it is an epidemic and there are ways to combat it. But as you mentioned earlier, if you are lonely, the instinct is to stay alone, which is more hurtful.
Right, because there's an enormous amount of shame associated with it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Paul Hokemeyer, family and addiction specialist. Thanks so much for watching Arise America in New York. I'm Duarte Geraldino. We'll see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye.